The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process. Welcome back to The Process. On today's episode, we're talking to Joel Roston, who is partner and composer of Title Card Music and Sound. It's a firm that creates music for films, commercials, podcasts, all different types of media. Joel's also a composer of chamber works and solo works for various ensembles. He's also a visiting faculty member in media composition at the Longy School of Music at Bard College. Joel's album we're going to listen to today is a unique, kind of interesting take on sort of the miniature idea. Joel refers to them as valances. His album, We're Able, is self-described as 40 valances for stereo guitar. You might not know what stereo guitar is. That's okay. I didn't really know what it was before this interview as well, so we'll learn together about it. Joel does a great job of describing how it works and how it actually, the specific guitar he's using is designed to be able to handle and output a signal unlike normal electric guitars. So we'll learn a little bit about that. Joel also talks about this idea of tension and release. It's interesting. Sometimes in music, we're determining tension and release in a sort of diatonic way or based on some type of harmonic structure. And Joel kind of brought up the idea that sometimes that tension and release is not only just for the listener, but for the player. So for him, sometimes, some of the times we're experiencing tension or hearing something, it's actually a difficult hand position that's resolving to sort of a, first or second position or a more common sort of resting position for guitar players, where their hands can kind of naturally rest, or if, they've sort of taught themselves, first, second position along the neck of the guitar. So I think Joel does a great job in these valances to kind of mesh those two worlds of sort of this, tension of sound, but also maybe even tension for the performer and sort of the hand shape or where they're actually placed on the fret. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the first two valances from We're Able, new album out by Joel Roston, available everywhere.
1. Two. Well, most of the time I'm inspired to make music just because it's my job and someone calls me saying they need music.
Sure.
And so that is just an unavoidable motivation.
Right.
But I think that, I seem to not line up with a lot of people I know because I go to music to create these like structures
Mhm.
um, that give me some control inside
Mm.
of myself
Yeah.
rather than I am not a like I go to music to be free kind of person.
Right.
I am like I go
Right.
to music to like make things work out exactly how I want them to work
Right.
out
Right.
because life doesn't work out that way.
No, no.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's just a sort of kind of a playground for me to imagine um, or just kind of feel the feeling of things working out well.
Yeah.
Um,
And so there can
so
be this structure and this order. So are you inspired by like form, like a form you're like, wouldn't it be great if you had this idea and it could go through this sort of very specific system or very specific path?
yes, I think I am like, and this is like, when I get in the discussions with my friends, this is like,
Mhm.
I am just so much more interested in architecture and structure
Right.
than like possibly more than how a thing even sounds. And I don't like,
Right.
I'm not even,
Right.
I don't feel comfortable saying that that's totally the case, but
Right.
it
Right.
might be the case. Like
Yeah.
it's that sort of
Yeah.
deep for me.
Yeah.
So like the pitches to me, like, pitches and sound is kind of is like representing architecture to me.
Yeah.
Um, and I think
I
it's annoying for a lot of my friends because they're like, "Hey, I
mhm.
heard this thing that I think you'd really like," because it
Mhm.
has this sort of like maybe sounds like it has some kind of formalistic component that I would enjoy, but the sort of
Yeah.
underlying architecture to it to me is not it
Mhm.
doesn't get at the specific thing that I'm always interested in getting at. And
Mhm.
I think it becomes a guessing game for some of my friends, then it makes
Right.
them feel sad.
Will Joel actually like this? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just not I don't like being that person,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I nevertheless am at the
Yeah.
moment. So
Well, I can agree with that. I'm very drawn to process and what might be considered process music. Which sometimes is a dirty word, but I find myself drawn to music that expresses sort of structures or even my enjoyment of like drone music is that it's this thing that's going to take a much longer time to kind of develop and sort of render itself, but it's about this like slow motion or this movement towards something. And I agree with you. I find that kind of very calming, especially in a chaotic world.
exactly,
Having something that is going through a process or is running through a cycle is very
totally.
nice. So, in general, then you get inspired by some type of process, some types of structure, or just kind of like I say at the open of this podcast, finding meaning in our world and lives. You get inspired by that. Where do you go? Do you hop on the guitar? Is that your first place to sort of interact or work with ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many composers,
Mm.
I feel so the guitar is my main instrument.
Right.
I've taken piano lessons for years off and on.
Sure.
I am
Yeah.
definitely would not call myself any kind of piano player. I find the piano to be just
Mm.
diabolical and demented, but I try still.
Yeah.
Um, I think like many composers, I sort of write different music when I'm writing on my main instrument.
Right.
And
Right.
especially with the guitar, it's very sort of shape based
Right.
in a way that the piano, all the chords sort of look the same.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I know that like these sort of these structures that I employ are similar, but I think the
Right.
music ends up sounding different if I am writing music on a guitar.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think
it's
that's just because it's so idiomatic to the guitar then? Because you are a player and you know the shapes and the structures, like,
Yeah,
do
and I think that the sorts of sounds that I enjoy sort of go along with the hand shapes that I enjoy on a guitar. So
right.
there are just bound to be like
Mm.
specifically there are bound to be like more say parallel minor seconds that I write on a guitar than if I'm
Yeah.
writing on a piano, just
Right.
because how my hand enjoys being on a guitar
Yeah.
enjoys those sorts of shapes, and on the piano it's just a little more clumsy to just kind of like
Yeah.
you know go up and down the keyboard.
Right. Have two notes that close
Yeah,
together. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So then maybe sometimes in your music, when we hear what we might not interpret as tension and release, it might be your hand going from a further stretched position back to sort of home base. And that you
It's
might be inferring that as resolve, where we're like, oh, that sounds more dissonant or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's totally
Mhm.
true. And I think that a lot of the music that I write on the guitar probably,
Mhm.
I have thought about that. I have never
Mhm.
stated it to myself as lucidly as you just did, but yeah, like a lot of the sort of feeling that I get out of guitar music that I write might be
Mhm.
inside of the actual performance of it,
Right.
um,
Right.
as opposed to being in the actual sound of it.
I worry about that with, using the push and some of the interfaces that I use to perform pieces live. I worry sometimes that it's easy to do or it's idiomatic to do on the interface. So then I find myself saying like, "Oh, well, this is how I'll make compositional decisions based on how I'm going to perform it or how it's going to interface, or how I'm going to interface with the interface."
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And what the thing that I think of whenever these sorts of conversations come up is when I was
Mhm.
in school, a
Mhm.
friend of mine who's a great composer
Mhm.
and guitar
Mhm.
player,
Mhm.
he has these very his hand is very different than my hand. He has these very
Right.
sort of complex chordal
Mhm.
shapes that he enjoys playing on the guitar.
Mhm.
And he wrote a song,
Mhm.
and he was like, check this out. Only he had tuned his entire guitar to an A minor chord instead of
Okay.
standard tuning.
Right.
And he was
Okay.
using the exact same shapes that he
Yeah.
liked.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's riveting, right? That is
Right.
like rib
Right.
that is like
Right.
almost a as pure a statement as you can get
Yeah.
at, like to say like this almost has nothing to do with the sound of this music. If you are
Right.
using the exact same shapes that you
Shapes.
enjoy in a
Yeah.
wildly different tuning.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just interesting and he just found music that he could make in that tuning with those shapes
Mhm.
that he enjoyed that
Mhm.
sounded like his music.
Yeah.
And it was a real, I don't know if it was a lesson or just kind of like a weird sort of spooky thing that haunts me.
Yeah, and because I think there's always this pull to write idiomatic music, and then we often what happens like I feel like especially early on by teachers whoever it's like it should be idiomatic, and then we go back and listen to some of the music that we share over hundreds of years, and some of it is so unidiomatic, like it's just so
Totally.
difficult to play, but
Yes.
it's like a cool piece, and stayed the test of time, and you can even tell some musicians will just be like, "Oh, I got to play that piece again," and it's like it's like I have carpal tunnel from playing that
Yeah,
piece. Like,
yeah. So I think a lot of new music works that way too.
yeah,
Just because we like
mhm,
it's so awesome that we have so many
mhm,
different kinds of people making
right,
music,
mhm,
but it might not be awesome when you're
mhm.
a guitar player and someone's like, "Oh, I'll just put the right hand to the piano and the guitar and it'll be fine." And
Right,
then
right.
like what do you just need to like that's
Yep, figure
it's
it out. Figure
yeah, exactly.
it out.
9. So this music was all written on a nylon string guitar, and
Great.
actually like a third of it was
Mhm.
recorded on a nylon string guitar.
Great.
My like sort of fancy classical guitar, which
Mhm,
I haven't used for a while, and
mhm,
wound up just hurting my hand in a way that maybe
mhm,
my I have
mhm.
changed my playing style, or maybe it has just aged in a way that
Sure.
and while it sounded the things that I recorded sounded exactly like I wanted them to sound,
Right.
I just couldn't I got to some pieces that were just too I couldn't do it on
Mm,
that guitar.
mhm,
So the stereo electric guitar is actually a friend moved to California
mhm.
and said, "Do you want to hold on to this?" And it was I actually have it right here.
Oh, great.
It's an Ovation, like
Oh.
literally it is a stereo
Oh,
guitar.
wow. Okay.
I had never heard of one either. And whenever
No.
I mention them to someone, they're like, "What's a stereo guitar?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Well, let me tell you about it." But yeah, it literally takes a signal from each pickup and
Oh, and
puts it, you record it onto a stereo track. And so it's
wow. So, just for anybody who's listening instead of looking, when you held up the guitar there, there was the normal, mono output or, eighth inch output or a quarter inch output, but then there was one that was stereo as well. So I'm
yeah.
assuming you
So
could plug
you
like
would
a
plug, yeah, you would plug
TRS.
them
Yeah.
both with like a Y
Oh, you could
splitter.
plug both of them in. Okay, great.
You plug into the mono and stereo jack, and then it's
So then it's not, left and right, high and low or something like on a piano. It's basically it's being spatialized by the either top pickup or bottom pickup. It looks like that guitar had two like humbuckers on it or something like that, like one at the
yeah.
top and one at the bottom. Very cool. So then that gives you maybe what's happening in the left or happening in the right is going to have a little bit different timbre because the pickup's in a different location.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the conversation that we're hearing. So I noticed like right away there one overarching conversation that I heard or kind of back and forth was there'd be this difference between something that felt very open and sort of full on the guitar. Probably that stereo electric guitar was kind of we're hearing a bunch of that, but there was like that open sort of California guitar, I'm calling it, you know what I mean? Like
Totally.
very open. And then it was like Bach. And it's not that extreme, but it was very, contrapuntal. It felt like sometimes it felt like we were just like dropped in the middle of a fugue. Like I was just like, wait,
Yeah.
we're at, and sometimes it was at the end of the fugue. Sometimes it was like right in the middle. So was that one of the things you were playing with sort of texturally was to like kind of have more open sort of valances and then ones that were, highly sort of organized or contrapuntal?
I think not consciously, I wasn't like, well,
Mhm.
I've already done three of these kind of
Right.
more contrapuntal ones. I should put
Yeah.
this other one. They're
Yeah.
all sort of on the album in the order that they were written.
Hmm.
Um, I think that they just, part of it is that I was kind of like, I'm sort of exploring my particular vocabulary on the guitar. So,
Right.
these are things, this album is also, it's just like this is the album of a guitar enthusiast, right? This is
Sure.
like, and so
Sure.
I kind of kept searching for other techniques and other things that sort of
Right.
get me going about the guitar,
Right.
in service of just kind of capturing the feeling of these sorts of conversations.
Yeah.
But there are conversations, um, sort of golden threads that do sort of the different valences definitely speak to each other.
Mhm.
Um, but not, I didn't consciously think like, you know,
Yeah. Okay. I've
these
done.
slower drony ones,
Right.
kind of like are
Yeah.
in conversation with these other ones, but they
Mhm.
clearly are. If you think
Yeah.
that they are, then that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, or at least, it's something I heard. One thing I noticed too is that so they are really short. So sometimes like the episodic nature of them, a lot of times when we're like listening to a quote unquote piece, it's like, here's your main theme, here's your idea. And sometimes that's repeated, sometimes that takes up a lot of space, and then there's variation, right, on that. In the most basic
Right.
explanation of
Yes.
some type of music,
Totally.
right? Like
Yes.
drone music would not fall into this. Other, ambient or non sequitur type music wouldn't fall under this. But in a traditional sense, that episodic stuff or repetition or variation wouldn't happen right away. And like I said, sometimes on some of the valances, I feel like we jump right into it. Like I even feel like with Valence 24, um, it, 24 is like very open and yet episodic, where it feels like then the following Valence 25 is like we ended up right at the end of a fugue. Like it's just like, it felt, or, maybe not a fugue, but something very, very contrapuntal. So
Yes.
I noticed the like variation. It was like, here's your idea. And sometimes even that idea was almost sounded like to me a variation.
Yes. I hear what you're saying, and I
Mhm.
think, as my friend Kid Million says,
Yeah.
it's all in there.
It's all
But
in there.
when I think of Valence 24, for instance,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the conversation that is sort of inside of that particular piece, right?
I
And
see.
so like how that exists for me, like when I hear that piece of music, I am hearing a like statement, like you said, this like sort of
Right.
original statement.
Sure.
And then what I'm trying to get across in that is that you have these sort of like kind of bass notes that are starting off every phrase,
Right.
and they are sort of contradicted and recontextualized by
Right.
the sort of the melody that happens after them. So
Right.
that's just sounds like two sides of a conversation to me happening, and
Right.
the bass note keeps trying to gain different ground by changing around, and then
Right.
the actual melody that follows each statement of the bass note takes the conversation in a place that the bass note did not intend for it to go.
Which is sort of like, then is it a conversation or is it more of a debate? And
Right. And so that
yeah,
is right. And so
yeah,
that this gets into sort of what these conversations tend to feel like to me when I try
yeah,
to have them, and why, like I would not
yeah.
want to be in a conversation like that. Right.
Right,
This
where
is
you're the
like
bass note and you're constantly trying to move to
right,
like, yeah,
exactly.
oh,
Exactly.
yeah,
And like and Valence 25 is,
hmm,
that is like that is you kind of I'm thinking of the two voices in this one sort of happening in sort of parallel.
hmm,
They are happening at the same time, but
hmm,
they are just not meeting necessarily. They are
hmm. So they're having similar motion, they're having like
yes,
similar trajectories, but yet they're speaking two different languages or
right. The
two, yeah.
harmony is kind of not
uh,
adding up to any kind of collaborative conversation.
24. $25.
For some reason, Valence 37 just felt like, maybe like you said, the bass and the treble or the different components seemed to be sort of in agreement, or there
Yeah.
was some resolution. Yeah.
I will tell you that Valence 37
Hmm.
might be that it is a short piece of music, but the
Yeah.
feeling of that piece of music to me
Yeah. Yeah.
is like the best one could ever hope for a feeling in
Yes.
life, right? Which isn't to say it is awesome ecstasy. It's
Yeah.
to say that like
Hmm.
nothing terrible seems to be happening.
Hmm.
And there is like this like sort of melancholy tinged
Yeah.
relaxation,
That sounds
right? And
where I'm
like
at.
that is like if I could just feel that all day, then that would be
Yeah.
like that is
Yeah.
so that is like I think about that one is one that I like if I just
Yeah.
go back if I just open up
Hmm.
this music and just play through them,
Hmm.
which I do sometimes just to make
Yeah.
sure I still can.
Yeah.
That is the one when I get to that when I'm just like this is so
Mhm.
nice
Yeah.
for me.
And I think that's funny. It's kind of like the valances are almost like a mood ring, right? Like, what is your
Totally,
like
yes.
what is your vibe? And it's like,
Yeah,
I'm
which
I'm
valence are you?
striving for
Right.
37 like all the
Exactly right.
time. Yeah.
Totally. I
Yeah.
mean, that's absolutely
Hmm.
true. I'm
Hmm.
absolutely striving to make my life feel like that.
37.
what I am looking to get out of these particular things is kind of stated inside of each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, like if a client called and was like, hey,
Yeah.
can you please like write an hour-long theme and variations on number 15 or whatever, I would
Yeah,
be
I love
happy
15.
to.
You expand the idea. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for me, it just feels like I didn't really have the inclination to do
Yeah.
it. I think a lot of the reason that I haven't had the inclination to do it is that when I think that I sort of approach writing longer music in a different way, which is that I
Mm-hmm.
would write a much simpler thematic material that I can wildly spin out of control,
Right.
and have it be this very, very simple building block that kind of goes crazy. Whereas some of these things, they kind of start out a bit more opaque or complex.
Yeah.
And that is not the kind of thing that I enjoy
Yeah.
developing. I enjoy developing very simple things into complex
And
things.
Joel, this has been fantastic talking to you about your new album, We're Able. It's 40 dialogic valances for, I guess we'll say, stereo electric guitar. And I think listeners will be interested in hearing the the conversation. And I definitely,
Awesome.
that's the way I approached it. I approached listening to it as a whole thing instead of saying, this and that, and getting
Cool.
really kind of hyper focused. But before
Awesome.
we let you go, maybe you can tell us a little bit about where we can find out more about you and your music, and maybe even purchase or listen to We're Able.
I am just at joelroston.com. It's a good place. I work music. I have a company called Title Card Music at titlecard.com, which is more of just kind of my music for media stuff with my business partner, composer P. Andrew Willis.
Mm-hmm.
And apart from that, I think you could find the record on any of the streaming places for the
Yeah, I
most
saw it
part.
was on Bandcamp and
Yeah,
all
it's
those.
definitely on
Yeah.
Bandcamp, and I think it's everywhere.
Great.
Everywhere fine music is discovered.
Thanks to Joel for sharing his time and music with us. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please check out other episodes in the series, like, subscribe, and leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.